Have you ever wondered if the problem in your workplace might actually be you? In this episode, we sit down with Dr. Crystal Ishihara, business psychologist and author, to unpack the real drivers behind toxic workplace dynamics. We challenge the bad boss narrative and explore a deeper truth. Culture is shaped by everyone, not just leadership. From burnout and micromanagement to trust and accountability, this conversation will push you to rethink how you show up at work and what it really takes to lead well. Okay, so I am so excited to introduce today's guest. It is Dr. Crystal Ishihara. And the reason why she is particularly special to me, not only is she an author and a professor and all kinds of amazing things, which we'll dig into in a second, but for those that know me, you know I am painfully trying to work through a dissertation. We are on year 6. This is the final year. And Dr. Ishihara is actually my dissertation chair. So we work very closely together. And I'm going to start with one question before we get into your background and kind of giving you a chance to introduce yourself. How horrible of a student am I?
Honestly, I don't have that many dissertation students because I am sort of in the middle of transitioning, and I wanted to work with you. You were one of my
Hmm.
favorite students, and you're such a good, dedicated writer, and you write so well. It was an easy yes when you reached out about needing a chair.
You're
A
being
horrible
so
student.
kind. So thank you. I am a good writer, but I just need to get my shit done.
I
But we're
mean,
still
that is
good.
every student though. Absolutely. Everybody just kind of needs whatever it is to get them motivated and get them working on it. So
Yeah. Well,
that's not
thank
a
you.
bad thing.
You have been amazing. So thank you so much. I honestly wouldn't have gotten through it without your support, I don't think. But with that said, back on track. For listeners that may not be familiar with your work, can you walk us through kind of your journey into business psychology and leadership development?
So I've been working since I was 16 years old, and Uh, I think I'm an observant person. I'm a critical person. So from my very first job, I've always just been paying attention to what works in a system, what doesn't work in a system. And oftentimes it was the leadership roles that were really either missteering or steering the ship in the right direction. And it felt like something I wanted to make an impact in
Mhm.
because I've been the coworker that everybody else needs to complain to because the boss is terrible. I've been the boss that has to work with employees who are frustrated with other employees, who are frustrated with other departments. And I really just wanted to study that, get some research behind the topic, and make sure that I could speak to things intelligently, not just anecdotally. And turns out like all of the anecdotes were still really, really beneficial throughout the program. But yeah, I basically started when I was 16 and I hated my first boss. And from that, I just wanted to
Yeah.
make things better, and I saw that as a way to do it. So, got my master's in industrial organizational psychology, moved on to get my PhD in business psychology, worked in higher education doing internal consulting for a number of years, did
Mhm.
my own consulting firm. So, yeah, I've just been kind of pushing along in the field, and now I'm even transitioning into a more person to person. I am working on my marriage and family therapy license right now so that I
Mhm.
can do more one-on-one support, and I do plan to have both of those industries kind of overlap in a good way.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, hopefully that boss from when you were 16 is listening today.
Hopefully they're not.
We can thank them for inspiring you to be on the path that you did take. Well, with that said, I want to dig into your book. I remember when we were doing the core curriculum that you had mentioned at one point that you were an author. And then more recently, when I was asking you about it and you told me the title, I was like, oh my God, of course it is. So it is a very attention grabbing title called Shitty Bosses and Asshole Employees. I love it.
Yeah.
And, it makes you laugh. And then I'm sure for many of us, we're like, well, there's some truth in that. What inspired you to write it? And what workplace patterns were you seeing that kind of pushed you to put this message out into the world?
In terms of why I wrote it, I was in a place where I had been spending a lot of energy working on my dissertation, and I still had all of the sort of motivation to write, but not a topic that I needed to work on anymore. And I'd always wanted to write a book, so my partner inspired me. He was like, go write a book. You've got the time and space already carved out. And we were talking about things that I felt passionate about, things that I felt interested in. And we were joking around, and Shitty Bosses came out of that as an idea. And it was one of those sort of lightning in a bottle where I think he said, you should write about your shitty bosses. Or, I forget exactly how the conversation went, but I immediately started to have ideas about, yeah, the chapters can look like this, and this is what I can do with it. And with that inspiration, just kind of went with it.
Yeah.
I do have a copy here, just figured for the
Uh-huh.
the
Yeah.
podcast. So
Yeah. Yep.
that's the book.
Say don't read the book.
It says, "Don't read this book. Shitty boss is an asshole employee."
I love that.
Yeah, I'm a millennial, so it's very much like if I tell you to don't do
Right.
this, maybe you will.
Of course. Yeah. Whatever you do, don't buy this book and read it.
Right, exactly, exactly. So trying to use a little bit reverse psychology there. Let's see if it helps. In terms of patterns that I saw, I think by that point I had been working for almost 20 years, just seeing how things weren't working, I guess is
Mhm.
a good way to put it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of lack of respect, a lot of lack of understanding or communication. I was finding that leaders didn't know how to lead. I an academician who had been studying this for a really long time and then trying to go into the field to actually utilize that information in an impactful way. It's not like I can drop off a textbook with a CEO. It's not like I can even put it in a PowerPoint in a way that makes it interesting to them and makes it stick with them. And because I've been a storyteller, I thought, why not tell it in the form of stories where people can relate to the stories, people can recognize how it shows up for them. And a lot of the people that have read it come back to me and say things like, oh, chapter whatever was really, really important because I have that boss. So yeah, I think that that kind of all culminated in the book.
Yeah. You touch on a point that seems to weave itself through many of my episodes, since technically this is a leadership podcast. And at least in my industry, it's been my experience, and I can't help but assume this is similar in other industries. What we find a lot of times, you have a really good employee. They're responsible, they show up, maybe they've been with you for a few years or what have you. And when a position opens, they are the one put into the position, but there's a lack of the foresight to train and provide resources and actually create almost that succession roadmap of, maybe you're great and I think you could be a manager, but let's take 6 months and train you on some of these fundamentals that you need to actually thrive as a leader. And that happened to me. I found myself in a position where the hospital owner had come to me. And when he said, oh, we're going to make you the practice manager, literally, I was like, is that the best decision? Because I don't know how to do that. Right. And you stumble through it. And then to your point, we have these experiences with these horrible bosses. And to some degree, you have to question, well, maybe it's not completely their fault. Part of it is they were promoted or hired into the position without the resources. But with that said, it's also the individual of, are you driven to learn and do better? And maybe even acquire some of the information outside of the place of work if they don't provide the mentorship.
Yeah.
So I think it really tracks. And again, regardless of industry, I can't help but think we've all experienced that at some point in
Right.
our career.
Scaling
I
up is a saying because it exists everywhere.
Yes, but I do want to ask you a little more about the title. So it would suggest that the dysfunction actually exists on both sides of the
Oh, yeah.
relationship. And so, why is it important to acknowledge that workplace culture is a shared responsibility, in your opinion?
I think while a leader is going to be the one kind of giving direction, steering the ship, and helping people to see what you're striving toward, the employees are the ones that make up that department, that make up that company, that make up the culture. So you can have a super motivated leader, but if they don't have the respect of their employees, if they don't respect their employees in return, you're going to create a culture of dissonance and frustration, lack of communication, lack of trust in each other. I mean, that's just not a place that anybody wants to work. I do recognize that it should be a leader's job to take a lot of control over that. A lot of the reasons that I put this book together and didn't just focus on the bosses is we contribute to the problem as employees sometimes. A lot of it has to do with burnout, a lot of it has to do with how something is being led, but there is a point where there's a shift in attitude where somebody is no longer willing to put in the time and initiative, like the quiet quitting, right? People don't care anymore. It matters how they got there, but at that point, they become part of that problem. Quiet quitting is like they're taking things from work when they shouldn't be. They're talking crap about other employees or their boss. All of that is understandable based on the context of whatever the situation is, but it's not helpful and it's not going to make things better. And people stay, I think, because the economy is difficult, it's hard to find a new job, but it is a major contributing factor to the problem, and it makes things so much worse.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great point. Again, regardless of the theme, it keeps coming up of almost that accountability piece of the individual. And you can tag that to anything. You can tag it to the workplace culture. You can tag it to burnout, to, of course, my focus is mental health. On that part, we talk a lot about that in VetMed as well.
Mm.
And a lot of times it's this position, and I don't want to call it a victim mentality, but it's almost this position of, well, you, the business, what are you doing for me? And I would argue both parties do have to be involved, both have to be advocates, both play a role. Yes, some of the burden may fall more on one or the other, but we have to acknowledge it's not the job of others to make you a good employee or to even safeguard your mental health. It is also your job to be an advocate of yourself and what you allow and also what you contribute. And I can understand if you're in a really toxic workplace and we start talking about the compassion fatigue or burnout or just general stressors, you can start to become a little bit of a shitty employee because you're pissed off, and it,
Yeah.
it eats at you. And I think it's important to look in the mirror and be able to recognize that and say, okay, I don't like this person right now. Like, I'm not my best self. So what needs to change? Is it my attitude or is it my place of work? Like maybe I need to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the difficulty is that we know that we need to leave. We know that it's not the right place for us because we've been trying to work with our company, our boss. We need resources that we don't have, that they're not willing to give, or the company doesn't have, or the government is unwilling to provide. Right. And it feels like a stuckness. And I think that that's why we get into the different components of burnout where people just desensitize themselves because it's easier to dissociate from a difficult situation than it is to keep trying
Yeah.
to have that motivation to fix it. It's frustrating because as a boss, you can't always do anything about it. One of the things that I talk about a lot in the book is transparency, being honest about what you have control over, what you are trying to work on, because it keeps hope alive, I think, for an employee. Um, and it should be genuine transparency, not just I'm telling you this so that you remain hopeful. It's I'm telling you this because I am hopeful and I think that it will get better if we keep working this way.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk a little more about bad bosses just because I like it, or shitty bosses, I should say. What are some of the most common behaviors in your experience of a bad boss that quietly erodes team trust and engagement? So maybe they're not even aware that the behavior is causing this.
I already mentioned lack of transparency, but that's
Yeah.
a big one for me. And I think that especially in corporate cultures, there's this sort of we're doing this thing, but don't tell the employees yet. And there's a way to let people know something is going on while still making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do within what the company is expecting. But finding a way to be transparent with your employees as best as possible. And again, it's genuine transparency, taking away autonomy and control, the micromanaging stuff. The more that I look into micromanaging, it's something that people do because they're anxious. If you're a boss who's an anxious person and you just need to make sure everything is done a certain way, a lot of times that looks like micromanaging.
Mhm.
But on the employee end, micromanaging feels like you don't trust me, you don't think I'm competent, you don't believe in me. So even though I'm really great at what I do, you're treating me like a child, and I can't stand that. And I actually had a boss who was a micromanager, but I didn't mind it because she would tell me, I need to ask you this for my own sake. This is not about you. And
Mm.
she would ask about my updates on different projects and things like that. She would ask a lot, but every time she would say, sorry, I need to know for myself. I need to make sure it's on track. I know you're doing what you're supposed to do.
Mhm.
And that's the transparency I'm talking about. That's the reassurance that I think employees need. Because without that, I would have thought, why does she ask me all the time? She must
Right.
think like I'm not good at what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But it did give me a lot of direction to understand what she was expecting. So the communication was important there. But that additional personal disclosure of it was something she needed, that really helped to shift my perspective on how to respond. The last one I think I'll add is just lack of perceived competence. If a boss looks like a fool to their employees, looks like an idiot, like people don't want to follow that because they're
Yeah.
second guessing them all of the time.
Mhm.
And there's this narrative like, well, what do they know? They don't do this job. So I think there's a lot of disconnect when you have someone who's never done the job, who doesn't understand what the job is, who doesn't value the work that you do. And then they make a big decision that doesn't take into account a lot of an employee's experience. It comes across as like they're an idiot. They
Yeah.
don't know these things. And again, I go back to transparency because if you can say, hey, we considered XYZ thing, however, we decided to go a certain way because we needed to address this much longer list of things.
Mhm.
It helps people to understand we're like, you're not an idiot. You did make a tough decision,
Yeah.
but you did consider all of the things. Or being open to hearing that, hey, maybe you forgot a bunch of stuff that was important. Yeah, I think the micromanaging without transparency, perceived incompetence is really a big deal. And just overall, when employees feel disrespected, even if an employer is not trying to disrespect them, that is what's going to make people not want to be there anymore.
Yeah. Just to pile on that last comment, even if you're not the employee receiving the disrespect, but you observe it, that erodes the morale and the trust in the culture of that business too, because now you're like, well, if they do it to that person, they may do it to me.
Exactly.
Flip side, so just to keep it balanced, what are some ways that maybe employees unintentionally contribute to a toxic or dysfunctional work environment?
The quiet quitting is a big one, though I do think that is very intentional, right? They've decided like I have given up on this place. Um, Some ways that I think employees contribute to that environment without meaning to is being either loud when they should be quiet or being quiet when they should be loud. If you see a problem and you don't say anything about it, you are contributing to that culture at that point.
Mm.
If you are talking when you shouldn't be because you don't know anything about that problem and you know there's another expert in the room who should be speaking, that also contributes to the problem. I
Mhm.
think in general, lack of self awareness or maybe courage is needed in some instances to speak up.
Yeah.
But a lot of that has to do with company culture and what is rewarded versus what is disciplined or punished.
Yeah. Now, if someone is reading your book and they realize, oh my God, I'm a shitty boss. What is the first step that they should take towards course correction?
That is a good question. I'm a professor, right? So when I wrote this book, I kind of tried to make it sort of textbooky without being too textbooky. So
Yeah.
I literally have a section at the end of each chapter, which is
Okay.
just questions for self reflection. So it'll ask, like, what do you think that this boss should do differently?
Mhm.
So it externalizes the problem, doesn't make you feel like you're a shitty boss, but then it will ask at the end, like, what if this is you? What would you do differently now? So,
Mhm.
um, read the chapter, answer the questions, and it will guide you through some of those adjustments. There's also those same type of questions for employees. How do you handle a shitty boss? How do you handle it if you are the asshole employee? So there are reflection questions. I do ask the question and then give some answers, but then also allow for the reader to do some of that self reflection. So yeah, answer the questions, do the self reflection, but then also talk to your team about it because I don't know the reader. I made some very general guesses at what could be going on in the situation.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, your team is going to be the ones who can tell you what needs to be improved, what needs to be fixed. So talk to your team and listen to them.
Yeah.
It's not good enough just to ask.
Yeah. I feel like leaders, not all, but many are scared too because they're afraid of the answer. And I would kind of say, if you are approaching it from an angle of opportunity and I want to do better, like I think that's one of the first steps, right? Because now you're also leading by example, and maybe your asshole employee will ask their coworkers like, "Hey, am I a total asshole?" And they're like, "Well, just half the time, and we can work with that. How do we improve?"
Yeah, just half the
I
time.
love Yeah. One theme that always comes up with leadership today is accountability. How do leaders balance holding people accountable without creating fear or defensiveness with their team?
Like I said, I'm also working on becoming a licensed marriage and family therapist. And this comes up a lot in parenting, right? Because with
Mm,
parenting, there's a lot of discipline
yeah.
uh, that kind of needs to happen. And one of the things that has stuck with me is setting an expectation and following through with it. And I think that that is both important from a parenting perspective and a leadership perspective. People might not like what the end result is going to be. If, for example, let's say we need to finish a project by a certain deadline, if you set the understanding in advance, okay, if we don't finish this project, you guys are going to need to work overtime over
Mhm.
the weekend or something.
Yeah.
If we don't finish this project, our budget is going to be significantly impacted. And that might mean that we lose employees, again, with the transparency. But if you set that expectation, then it's almost like if it happens, then people are like, well, she told us. We knew that this was coming.
Mm,
So I think it's when there are empty threats, like, if you guys don't do this, you guys are going to get fired, or if you don't do this, I'm going to write you up. Like, if
mhm.
there's no follow through, that's a big problem. But people also get really upset if they're blindsided by something.
Yeah.
So if they don't finish a project that they thought they've been doing really well the entire time, and
Mhm.
then all of a sudden you're writing them up, that's going to create defensiveness, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right.
That makes sense.
Because defensiveness is a response to needing to protect yourself from something. And if someone is not consistent and you cannot predict what they're going to do, you put the other person in a fear response. You put them in a, like, I need to react to this, but I don't know how because I don't know what they're going to do. And that just kind of sets our brains on fire.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think you just hit on some PTSD for me from being an employee many, many, many years ago, where I had some leaders that I would say were unpredictable. And to me, that was the scariest type of leader
Yeah.
because the same scenario could trigger two very different reactions. And you didn't know kind of which personality was with us today and which way it was going to go. And
Hmm.
that becomes very challenging to navigate. But to your earlier point, if you are a leader and you double down on transparency appropriately, then you're filling those gaps for the team because you're telling them what to expect. And now they're not making up these stories of maybe this, maybe that. And I think that for everybody, then it's not only a healthier culture, it's probably a more productive work environment because now you're not distracted by the interpersonal stuff. You can actually focus on the job.
Absolutely. And I would add, it's not enough to rely on company policy and procedure. You can't just be like, well, they know that if they do something wrong, they're going to get written up.
Yeah.
You have to remind people constantly because for an employee, the goalpost is always moving. So it's consistency, it's transparency, it's reminding people over and over again.
And also, if you're not the one that wrote the handbook, who actually memorized 50 pages of an employee handbook?
Right?
Like maybe you skimmed it on day one as the new hire, but like you don't remember what's on page 28.
Right. Well, and even if you do, that's probably because you've been interacting with
Right.
that process already. So you're already in a fear state. You're already scared about what's going to happen. Anything a leader can do to ease that fear is going to make it so that employee can become more productive. Like discipline is about learning, not about punishing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. I want to pivot a tiny bit and focus a little bit on burnout. It's something that I hear all the time. I think everybody's talking about it. Leaders are struggling with it as well. How does leadership style either accelerate or protect against burnout within teams, or does it?
Yeah, it absolutely can't, right?
Okay.
I think that if a leader is not understanding of the situation that their employees are in, they cannot do anything to protect them from that burnout. So if you're very removed from your employees, you don't understand their day to day, you don't know how long it takes them to do something, you don't know how much they're working overtime or what their life is like outside of the work environment, even and then a new something comes up at work and all of a sudden everybody's resources are going to be heavily inundated. If you don't know that, if you don't understand your employees, you're just like, oh, another project they got to take care of, they got to do it.
Mhm.
um, Tough for them, right? You are not protecting your employees from that. Conversely, if you understand what your employees are going through, you can already be working to alleviate the stressors. If they're overloaded, you can be working on adjusting your budget to get more employees in there to support them. You can be working on cross training so that employees can do multiple types of jobs based on the time frame, not but understanding how to utilize your resources to take care of what your employees are needing. And then if they feel that you are caring for them at that point and you do have their best interest at heart, when that big project comes to pass and everybody has to like all hands in,
Mhm.
your employees are more willing to work with you. You are probably going to be able to jump in because you know the job so well. It makes such a big difference for a leader if they are doing what they can to protect their employees from burnout. Because to your earlier point, it is an employee's job to care for their own mental health, their physical health, and their motivation and initiative and to be in a job. And it is the company's job to prevent it as much as possible.
Yeah.
It's it's not cost effective for your employees to be burnt out and leaving all the time. It's not cost effective for your employees to be burned out and staying either. It's in the company's best interest for a leader to care about that, try to protect their employees from burnout and themselves.
We've kind of touched on this. I think everyone contributes to culture, right? The environment. But I would agree that it is the leader's responsibility to then help protect the culture. And that is through what you've just described with respect to protecting their time and their resources and energy, and also accountability. So holding individuals accountable. You mentioned it earlier, being transparent in that you're communicating the cause and effect. If you do this, this is going to happen, right? So I'm telling you what's going to happen. We're not going to be shocked. You choose yes or no. But by following through, that really does help cultivate that culture of accountability versus some leaders that we know they just struggle with conflict. They're going to threaten and promise this will happen and it never does because they just don't want to confront the individual when they should. And by confrontation, I don't mean it to be a negative thing, But I mean it to be, I need to give you some feedback or
Mm.
constructive criticism or whatever that may look like.
I would also add it is important to set those expectations upward as well. If you're a middle manager type of person, you set the expectations for your employee, you follow through. You also have to do the same for anybody that's above you. If
Mm.
you're in a leadership position and they're saying, we need XYZ things done by this amount of time, you can set the expectations the same way. Okay, if you need us to do that, these are the things what we are going to need, or this is what is potentially going to happen. We need X amount of time. We need X amount of resources. If we don't get those, it is going to be late. There's no reasonable expectation that it couldn't be that way. And this is the part that I think is really hard for managers. Don't push your employees to meet some unrealistic deadline just because your boss said so.
Yeah.
They also have to understand everyone above you that like this isn't fair. This isn't reasonable. We can't do this to our employees all the time.
Right.
And then you're going to be protecting your team, you're protecting yourself, but you're also setting very clear expectations. Like, this is what I said was going to happen.
Mm.
I think it's hard because our capitalistic culture doesn't like that. It's very much bent on we tell you to do it, you do it. And we need to start being more kind and caring and reasonable with our employees. And leadership needs to learn that from the people that are directly supporting those employees.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What's one leadership habit that seems small, but actually has a massive impact on trust and morale?
This is one of my favorite things that I learned in my program, and it's an old philosophy, and I've definitely adjusted it to my day to day, but it's just called walking the floor. Essentially, it's about a study where they were evaluating between industrial workers, one location versus another, same type of job, same type of work, but one was significantly more productive. And they observed that the leader there, the manager, was walking the floor. He was talking to the employees. He was asking them about their weekends, caring about them as human beings
Mhm.
before employees. And I think genuinely caring about the people that you work with
Mm.
by far going to make it so much easier to do the rest of this stuff. If you care about the person, you don't want to not be transparent. If you care about them, you're not going to disrespect them. If you care about them, you're going to protect them from people that are asking for unrealistic, unreasonable things. It,
Mhm.
it's just so much easier if you know your employees, you understand what their life looks like, and you want the best for them.
Yeah.
And if you don't know them, it's a lot easier to dehumanize them and remove yourself from what their life is like.
Sure. No, that's great. After writing your book and working with so many diverse organizations, what's the biggest lesson that leadership has taught you personally?
Think when I was younger, I thought, well, one, I thought that you become a leader and you just all of a sudden are supposed to know how to take care of everybody. And that's just not true, right? That's what we've been talking about. But I learned over the course of my experience that being a leader is not about you. It's not about your accolades, your accomplishments, how you got there. Once you become a leader, it is your job to take care of your employees. They now become the way that you show that you are doing a good job. You can be a leader that the company speaks highly of because you've accomplished XYZ thing. But I have always felt more proud when my employees were getting awards for things or they were accomplishing
Yeah.
things because that meant that I was doing the leadership part of it.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it's knowing that it's not about you anymore. And the other thing I'll say is our success is determined by our team and we need to act like it. And when I say act like it, I mean not only just appreciate them, but we need to compensate them appropriately, reward them. And I
Mhm.
don't mean like Friday pizza party or whatever. Like we need to support them in seeking promotion and getting their foot into the next room that they want to be in. Sometimes that means that they promote out of our department, they promote away from us, they go on to the next thing in their life,
Mhm.
but you will make them so much happier and they will be so much more productive while they're with you.
Yeah. In all fairness, I might be the minority vote, but I always love a pizza party. I mean,
I think it's not just it's the pizza party with nothing else in that.
But you said it so eloquently, and I completely agree. And I've always been a believer that number one, as a leader, if you genuinely focus on your people will run the business. And by that, the financial performance, all the things will fall into place. But it's like when you focus on the business performance or KPI solely and forget that there are people contributing to that,
Yeah,
that's when the businesses stall or start to fail. And then everyone's wondering, well, what's going on? You forgot about the most critical piece is
right,
your people,
right.
right? Be there for them, be a supporter, give them the resources, give them the pizza once in a while.
Pizza
Listeners,
every Friday.
yeah, don't be greedy. If listeners could walk away from today's conversation remembering one truth about leadership and workplace culture, what would you want it to be?
Think about what your team needs from you and do what you can to get it for them. And I don't mean raises or like, yes, raises, right? I just talked about compensation, but what they need from you might be someone who's going to listen to them when they had a really crappy day or they had a customer yell at them. And they just need you to listen. Maybe what they need from you is mentorship on how to get into the next position that they're seeking. Honestly, one of my employees was also seeking their doctorate. So we talked about his dissertation in his check-in time. Another employee was working on a lot of personal side projects. So he would ask for the time and he would be done with his work. So take it. But finding out what they need from you by getting to know them and then doing what you can to get that for them, I think is just so impactful. And I always try to approach the employees with a grateful spirit because they are the ones making me look good, right? So I always approach it with a grateful spirit, and I have found that that helps them to feel grateful for the team, the leadership.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Ishihara, I am so thankful for you joining me today, first and foremost. It was a great conversation. I love your book. I love what it's about. I love what we talked about today. I pray that many leaders listen to this because I think they need to hear it. And it would go a long way. And I promise you, I have some edits that I owe you on my dissertation, and I will get them to you before Monday.
I will read them when I get them.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been so great to spend time with you, and I I know that we've worked together on the dissertation, but it's been nice to talk to you about just what
Yeah.
we do.
Something different. It
Yeah.
was really fun. Thank you.